Just yesterday we saw the announcement and release of Fallout First, a new subscription service for Fallout 76. I made a full video talking about this and my opinions. If you haven't seen it, you can click in the little I, but in effect it'll cost you $13 per month or $100 per year, and you'll receive these benefits in exchange. Things like a private server, although it does have fairly limited options, and exclusive armors or other items you could use in game. So although there's been a ton of backlash and outrage around this announcement, and a lot of it justified and rightly so, and in fact, as of late, there's actually been some reports that there's issues with the scrap boxes deleting all of the junk you put in it, which frankly is just oh so Fallout 76 of you. Very unfortunate for those players, but at the same time, from a distance, kind of hilarious. Although, to be clear on that one, people have made stuff up in the past with this game, so I take it somewhat lightly until you see a little bit more evidence. One question I don't really see too many people asking is why? Not a why on the backlash, a why on why would Bethesda do this? Obviously, companies want to make money, and this will probably make them at least some amount of money, but I'm honestly not sure they could have picked a worse time to actually implement it. They just announced a big delay in their DLC, which, although being mostly good, most people want them to get that right, to then a week later announce that you're going to have a subscription service when there's really not a lot of new content coming, and even over the past few months there really hasn't been too much good new content. A lot of it has been falling flat or just not being a success among players, and from an optics perspective, the announcement of Fallout First came at a very bad time, and even the wording of it made it feel like a big slap in the face to a lot of players. And although it might be as simple as just Bethesda's greedy or Bethesda is bad now, but I think if you actually look a little bit deeper into it, there is some additional context that just explains a lot. The more real reality behind the $7 fridge and the $100 per year subscription service. So in this video, I want to go over what in my eyes is the real reason we're seeing changes like this at Bethesda. Again, I've talked about it in the past, but with the most recent information, it is very relevant again, and I think a great example of why it's changing. So something very important to discuss first, Bethesda actually has a parent company, an owner. ZeniMax Media owns Bethesda in full, as well as several other companies. Specifically in this video, I'm really just going to be focusing on Bethesda Game Studios, that being the developers of Fallout 76, but also Fallout 4, Skyrim, Fallout Shelter. One of the big pieces of commentary I had on the current Fallout First situation is how I was shocked, everyone else was shocked. If you look at Bethesda, starting back in 2015, 2016, almost every single game they've released since then has marked a shift. Prior to 2015, Bethesda released games every few years. You would have the big game release, then a couple of big expansions, and then they'd move on to the next one. But starting with Fallout Shelter, everything after that has been a microtransaction focused game. You had Fallout Shelter, free to play with microtransactions, then we saw the integration of Creation Club, we saw Fallout 76 and its own atomic shop, but even some more mobile games like the Elder Scrolls Blades and Fallout Shelter Online. And even within Fallout 76, there was a clear progression here. They started with just microtransactions, but worked their way up to things like a $7 fridge, and then eventually the graduation at a full-fledged subscription service. So I think the major source of these change, and really why we're seeing a subscription service in Fallout 76 now, is due to Providence Equity. So to keep things simple, Providence Equity is basically a company that will give your company money for a stake in it, and then later on try and get a return on their investment. In 2007, they gave ZeniMax $300 million for 25%, and then again in 2010, they gave them an additional $150 million for an undisclosed stake. And to be clear with this part, even though I talked about this in a past video, I didn't discover this. There's been a couple of videos before mine, and I do want to credit them here, and I will have links to those down below. And where this all becomes significant is back in 2016, somebody from either Providence or ZeniMax leaked to Bloomberg that Providence was looking for an exit strategy. With their stake in ZeniMax, they were considering going for either an IPO or a sale of the stake overall. So that's obviously pretty significant. It shouldn't be downplayed in the slightest. It's not like big companies will just be like, oh, maybe I'll sell my $450 million investment now. Quite a bit of planning and consideration has to go into something like that. Considering we never heard the news of ZeniMax being sold, having an IPO, or Providence selling their share of ZeniMax, what this likely means is it never happened. And I think one of the major reasons it may have not happened is ZeniMax and Bethesda by proxy has a pretty unappealing revenue model. In the video game industry, or at least how it used to be, you would release a new game and then release expansions. You'd have a massive influx of revenue, then a few smaller blips, and then nothing while you were developing. That's a big risk. It's a big gamble every few years that you're hoping this game really delivers. When you're looking at a company to buy, when you're looking at the financials of a company, you don't want to see big bursts of revenue like that. You want to see consistent and predictable revenue. Like, I don't know, maybe releasing releasing some new microtransactions for your various games every couple of weeks to months. So then on a month-to-month or week-to-week basis, you could pretty closely monitor, hey, look, these people are buying at this rate. Then you could see a gradual growth and decline. They probably saw as they started selling utility items, a lot of people are buying them. So they're like, hey, we should do more of this. But of course, one of the most appealing versions of this would be in a subscription. So you could get maybe a one-time payment of $100 out of some people, or just people locked into this thing that will automatically charge them every month. Then you could very easily track subscriber count and very easily predict future revenues. And of course, with the ultimate goal of it looking really good to potential investors, buyout options, or an IPO. And some more evidence of that, specifically in Fallout 76, is that Bethesda gave a lot of users who are in this category, who are spending money in this way, a lot of incentive to sign up for this program because it makes their activity a lot more predictable. The difference in somebody actually going out of their way to cancel a subscription versus somebody who's going to go out of their way to actually buy an extra bundle each month is big. Inconsistent yet high revenue is a lot riskier than consistent but moderate revenue, and that's where a lot of companies are moving nowadays. That's why you see so many subscription service or repeat customers. I think the latest subscription service is just the final evolution of that. It is that consistent and predictable revenue model that people want to see, especially people you're trying to convince to buy your company. And I think if you actually look at the context of the most recent situation, it makes a lot of sense. It's pretty safe to assume that Fallout First has been planned for at least a little bit now, and probably planned to release with Wastelanders. You drop the massive DLC people have been wanting and waiting for, and with it you also add a new subscription service to try and monetize all of those new players. It likely became clear internally that if they were to release Wastelanders, there would be some pretty major backlash, but on the flip side, when it actually comes to the subscription service model, they likely promised this to ZeniMax and Providence as they were requesting it, so they still had to drop it even though Wastelanders wasn't releasing. And that's why it probably feels so out of place, so untimely, because I feel like this was one of those decisions that came from very high up. And if you look at Fallout 76 overall, I think that makes a lot of sense. They probably intended to go cosmetic only initially, then we're like, hey, why don't we try utility items? Realized, oh, hey, these are selling really well and really consistently, and that's why we're seeing more and more of it. So now the exact relationship between Providence, ZeniMax, and Bethesda themselves isn't clear. I could be totally offbeat with this. Maybe Bethesda was just like, hey, I want more money, so they started adding features like this. But I think it actually makes a lot of sense that this could be coming from the top, from the ZeniMax board itself, and that significant stake Providence does hold, as ZeniMax overall is looking for an exit strategy. Maybe they're tired of being in the video game business and want to build up that consistent revenue in hopes of actually getting a buyout or a successful IPO. So naturally, taking this all together, it still is speculation. I don't actually know what's going on internally, but I think if you actually take all these parts together, it makes a lot of sense. A lot more sense than Bethesda just picked an incredibly bad time to announce their new subscription service. And again, with the dynamic being unclear, it does make me question who is really to blame here. How much of the blame would fall on figures at Bethesda, like the Todd Howards, and how much of it would actually fall at figures at Providence and ZeniMax? That's likely one of those things we'll simply never know the answer to, but it definitely is something interesting to keep in mind. With that, it's not really my intent to come off as a Todd Howard or Pete Hines apologist. I mean, after all, they still did sign off on the release of Fallout 76 in that state, as frankly, we really don't know who's making some of these decisions. But one of the things that makes me question it is some of these just feel like there is such a disconnect. Like, I just scratch my head, I'm like, how did you manage to screw this up so badly? Or how are you this disconnected from your audience? And what if it is in fact that the person that's kind of pushing these things to get implemented is really disconnected from their audience because it's just a member of the board of the parent company of the game developer, which is developed in this one specific studio of that game developer. Now, in all likelihood, Bethesda probably plays some role in this, but is it like a 50-50 split as someone was like, hey, maybe we should do this, and Bethesda was like, oh yeah, maybe that's a good idea? Or is it more like, hey, we really want to see this kind of stuff added with these games, we need you to figure out a way to implement it, and we need it out by this specific date? Because I could see a situation like that being fairly plausible. And if that is the case, it makes it seem like, at least to me, that this will be kind of insulated from some fan backlash. If the revenue keeps flowing and this does end up being a financial success, the PR aspect will probably be pretty irrelevant, especially if this actually is people trying to get out of this industry to begin with. What do they care if they tarnish the franchise in the process. But with that, hopefully you guys found this video informative. Hopefully it adds some context that I think is much needed with the current situation of Fallout 76, and it's also one of the reasons I'm hesitant to think anything's going to change going forward. As always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.